Okay, wow. Guys, America is amazing. Like, what is...
I have never seen anything so big in my entire life. Get your mind out the gutter. I'm talking about Buc-ee's. I came to America for the World Cup, but honestly, I feel like this might be the main attraction for me.
I will say, walking through the doors there, it was one of the most mind-boggling things I've ever seen. I've been to many stadiums at this point, but you walk in and it's the immediate stadium you see. It's so huge, and it's...
Europeans come to America for soccer, but a few weeks later, when they returned home, what they talked about the most was not the last-minute goal, the trophy, or any star on the field. That was the air conditioning. Ice. Free refill. The restrooms can be found without a treasure map. And the staff seem genuinely happy to see guests walk in. Then they return to the old streets, the old houses, and the old habits. England still has pubs, historic football fields, and neighborhoods that America cannot replicate. But now, the cup is smaller, the room is hotter, the line is longer, and the silence of the strangers also seems colder than before. Not because the hometown has changed, but because after seeing another system, they began to realize how many inconveniences had been hidden under the name of tradition. And that is the story we will explore today. Most Europeans coming to America are mentally prepared with a sense of caution, because for a long time, what they have heard most about America is, America has become a dangerous nation. America as of now is not a safe place to be. There's not enough law enforcement for how many people we have living here. But what is the truth?
Gotta show you this because it looks like just another door to the entrance. But when you walk in here, look what happens. You're already inside the stadium. It looks like in a freaking shopping mall.
Unbelievable.
It doesn't
This is
look
not a stadium.
I see it.
Dude, that's great.
Everything is so much bigger in America. Look at this French fries. Look at this, the size of my head.
I can't believe it.
Are you joking me?
I didn't know that Costco had your beans.
Honey, this is insane.
Yes, a reverse culture shock has really happened. It sounds academic, but in reality, it's very easy to understand. It's the feeling of leaving a familiar place, living long enough in a different environment, and then when you return, you suddenly find your homeland unfamiliar. On the first day in America, a British tourist might look at a glass of water full of ice and laugh, "Why do they put so much ice in it?" A week later, he no longer took photos. 2 weeks later, he naturally thought that he would be served more free water soon. And on the day he returned to England, when in front of him was just a small cup with a few meager ice cubes, he felt as if someone had quietly cut a privilege he had never known existed before.
This is large fries in America. This is large fries in England.
Look at the what? And the thought is like that's a baby's burger.
You gotta go in with one of these.
This was our portion size. They gave it to us unironically too.
It's not that European bodies want to eat larger portions or need to drink more water. It's not just after a few games that they have become Americans. What really changes is the standard by which they compare everything. That's just how people are. We rarely evaluate an experience in an absolute manner. We always unconsciously compare it to the experience that just happened before. A small room wouldn't be uncomfortable if you always lived in rooms like that. But after a few weeks in a more spacious place, that same room suddenly makes you feel a bit cramped. A quiet employee wouldn't be anything special if that were the usual way of communicating. But after many days of being chatted up by Uber drivers, being asked by restaurant staff, or having strangers smile and wish you a good day, the silence upon returning suddenly has weight. And that's when the funny reaction videos online start to make much more sense. It turns out they are not just comparing America with England. They are comparing what they once imagined with what they actually experienced.
You know what I love about America? I love when you go grocery shopping, they pack your groceries for you. I lived in London for 8 years, and when I tell you the amount of stress I would go through every single time I go grocery shopping with 2 kids, like for example, going to Costco, the speed in Costco at which they scan things is unreal. I would never go to Costco without my husband because you just can't. In America, they actually pack stuff for you. An example of something America's done right.
You hear that, right? They are comparing their hometown in memory with the hometown after returning. And most importantly, they start to look back at things they once thought were normal at home just because they lived for a few weeks in a system that operates differently. Of course, a World Cup trip cannot represent all of America. Not every city is clean, not every service is perfect, and not every American is as friendly as in the viral clips on the internet. Social media always tends to capture the most interesting moments. Hardly anyone posts a 10-minute video just to tell the story of waiting for luggage or getting stuck in traffic on the way to the stadium. But the interesting thing is that when thousands of tourists from different countries are equally surprised by very similar details from the spaciousness, proactive service to the small conveniences in daily life, there are clearly underlying differences behind those reactions that are worth exploring. They come to America and see a country that seems to have too much, too vast, too cold, too many choices, and sometimes too enthusiastic. But when they returned, the discomfort came from England suddenly feeling too small in the little things. Not too little history, not too little culture, but rather too little convenience in moments they never thought they would notice before.
Europeans who are here for the World Cup are falling in love with America, not the American government. Don't get it twisted. Our cities, culture, natural beauty, amazing. But a president that 82% of Europeans think is a threat to democracy, that is what is holding America back. Yes, the videos of Scots in Boston are fun and a reminder that we should be grateful for our country, but tourists always see the best side of places, not the worst. And the worst side of America is our 35% approval rating corrupt president.
If you've ever felt the same way after a trip that your own home suddenly feels different, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss stories like this. Because right after this, we will encounter the first surprise for many European fans as soon as they set foot back home. It's not the stadium, it's not food either, but simply step into the house in the middle of summer, reach for the air conditioner remote, and suddenly remember that I am back in England. Their bodies are accustomed to a different level of comfort.
I'm so cold.
It's freezing. I have goosebumps.
They don't want people to stay in their store, I swear.
I just wanted to show you that this is my air conditioning and I have got it running 24/7. Unlike you peasants in Britain who are only allowed to get it and will get slapped a fine if you try and use it.
In the early days in America, many European tourists had the same reaction. It's too cold. They stepped from the sunny parking lot into the hotel and immediately zipped up their jackets. Entering the supermarket, it was cold. Going to the restaurant is cold. Getting into the car is also cold. Some people even joke that in America, summer only exists outside the parking lot, while inside every building they are living in, November. Many people laughed, recorded videos, and said, Americans are indeed addicted to air conditioning. But the interesting thing happened a few weeks later. When the World Cup ended, they returned to England. The door of the house opened, a warm breeze blowing into their faces. By reflex, they looked for the air conditioner remote, only to remember that they were home. The familiar desk fan was still in the corner of the room, the window was still open, and the curtains were still drawn tightly to block the sunlight. Everything was exactly the same as before they set off. Only their feelings were different.
I have a fever and it's hot as hell in here according to me. And meanwhile, my mom is trying to cosplay being European, not using the air conditioning, setting the temperature at 76 degrees.
You want to know what the biggest culture shock is as a European living in America? ACs and dryers. I grew up, if it was summer, it's 1,000 degrees inside. You're going to sweat. And if you need your clothes washed, they will hang everywhere. On chairs, on sofas, everywhere we have space, there's going to be some clothes hanging. You move to America, and suddenly, there's a machine for that.
That is something many people do not expect. The first thing to change is not the house, but the body. After a few weeks of living in an environment where the indoor temperature is always controlled, the body begins to get used to the feeling of stepping into a comfortable place, every place. The heat outside is still there, but it no longer follows you into the hotel, shopping mall, or stadium. When they return, just a slightly stuffy room is enough to make them unconsciously think, it seems hotter today than in previous years. Actually, the weather hasn't really changed. It's just that their tolerance threshold has changed. This is similar to the story of new shoes. The first day wearing them might feel a bit strange, but after a few weeks, it fits so well that when you go back to the old shoes, you realize how uncomfortable the old ones used to be. Convenience works in a very similar way. We only truly recognize its value after we have gotten used to it.
This is a huge difference between Spain and the US. Let's talk about air conditioning. It is very normal in the US to have the AC or the heat up and running 24/7. It is also very common to have a central ventilation system, thanks to these vents or those ones. None of this is common in Spain. We just use the AC when it's extremely hot. And most Spanish homes don't have the central ventilation system. We have these big AC units in the wall, and we usually have them in just one room out of the entire home. Yeah, it's pretty fun in the summer.
There is some quite interesting data. In the US, air conditioning has almost become a part of the living infrastructure. Meanwhile, in England, air conditioning is still not common in most homes. This does not mean that one side is right and the other is wrong. Two countries are simply built from two different conditions. The climate in England has been cooler for decades, with many houses designed to retain heat, while America has thrived in the air conditioning era, which has become the standard in modern residential areas. That's why, when summer heats up, the way each place responds is very different. But air conditioning is just the beginning. Many of the reactions after the World Cup revolve around a glass of water. It sounds funny, but just imagine. On their first day in America, many Brits looked at the cup full of ice and burst out laughing. What else can you drink like this? Then they drank it all. The staff member approached again, smiled, and poured more without asking much. By the third time, they started to find it completely normal. Then, when they returned to England, in front of them was a smaller cup, with less ice, and everything was just right. Not because the glass of water in England had a problem. What has changed is the feeling of being served. A large cup or a free refill doesn't make life much better, but it creates a very small signal in the mind that, you can relax, we will take care of the rest. It is that feeling that many people remember, not a few ice cubes or a few 100 milliliters of water, and perhaps the most interesting example is, to the bathroom. This is definitely not something everyone would put on a thumbnail, but it's something almost everyone needs. In many reaction videos, quite a few tourists say they were surprised because in the US, from supermarkets, rest stops, gas stations to stadiums, finding a clean restroom is usually quite simple. When they return, just encountering a door with a customers only sign or having to walk a few hundred meters to find a public restroom, they suddenly realize how important those small conveniences are. There is a very nice saying, the best infrastructure is something you almost never have to think about. You only realize its value when you need it, and it's no longer there. Of course, everything has two sides. Air conditioning consumes more electricity. Large portions sometimes lead to waste. Free refills do not mean the meal will be cheaper, and many conveniences in the US are also tied to a lifestyle that relies more on cars and consumption. Therefore, this is not a story about which country is better than the other, but it's a story about how very small experiences can silently change people's perceptions to a great extent. But the story doesn't stop there. We will move on to something even more interesting. A cool room or a glass of iced water only makes the trip more pleasant. But what makes many tourists change their perception of America is not the air conditioning or the drinks, but the people standing behind the service counter.
Why do I need to know the waitress name? Are we going to dinner with her tonight or something?
This is what you guys eat instead of beans on toasty breakfast? Yep.
Everyone talks shit about the World Cup in America and Canada. This is something we don't really have in Europe. These massive sports bars, there are already 8 on this side. There are TVs. These sports bars are absolutely fantastic. There's even like a second floor. Look, this is what you sit here. You drink your beer. You have, oh wow, even here there are TVs. They're like TVs everywhere.
Before the trip, many Brits thought they understood American service very well. A big smile. A familiar question, how are you today? A short conversation even though the two people have never met before. And of course, at the end of the meal, there will be an additional line for a tip on the bill. In the minds of many Europeans, all of that is just acting. Polite, yes, but not genuine. Friendly, yes, but only because of work. Then, the World Cup started. And this is what they fell in love with. Interestingly, after a few weeks, many reaction videos no longer talk much about football. Instead, they talk about very small conversations. An Uber driver, while driving, asked them which team they were cheering for and enthusiastically pointed out a local barbecue joint. A restaurant employee took out a piece of paper and wrote down a few places to visit after the match. A stranger saw the England jersey, smiled, gave a thumbs up, and chatted for a few minutes. Some were even invited to join a tailgate party before the game, just for standing next to a group of fans in the parking lot. The noteworthy thing is that none of them became close friends with each other. They also didn't exchange phone numbers. There was no Hollywood-style touching story. Just in a few short minutes, strangers made a traveler feel not completely invisible in a vast country. That is a very interesting aspect of communication culture in the US. Americans often do not hesitate to start a conversation with strangers. They might ask you where you're from, what you thought about the last match, or simply compliment the shirt you're wearing. For many Europeans, especially the British, that initially seems a bit strange. Some even wondered, does this person want to sell me insurance? But then, a few days later, they started looking forward to those small conversations again. And the real shock happened when they returned. On the train in England, everyone looked down at their phones. In the cafe, the staff smiled just enough, speak just enough, and complete transactions very quickly. On the bus, the entire cabin can be so quiet that you can hear the sound of the doors opening and closing. No one did anything wrong. Everyone is just behaving according to the social norms they are used to. Some people even humorously commented that in the US, the waiter asks where you're from. In England, sometimes you get the feeling that your geographical origin is information that needs to be kept confidential. It sounds funny, but behind that statement is a very interesting cultural difference. Americans often see initiating a conversation as a way to create closeness. Meanwhile, the British tend to show respect by not bothering others. Two completely different ways of behaving, and both have their reasons. So, it would not be fair to ask, are Americans friendlier than the British? Perhaps a more interesting question is, which society makes a stranger feel welcome more quickly? Those are two very different concepts. In the US, sometimes the smile of an employee is also tied to the service culture, tips, or customer experience. But regardless of the motive, the feeling that the recipient gets is still one of openness. On the contrary, in England, not asking too many questions is a way to show politeness and respect for personal space. However, after a few weeks of getting used to greetings, small talk, and very natural conversations in the US, many people start to feel that the silence upon returning is somewhat colder than before. The interesting thing is that many of the reactions are the same. Some people said, I didn't think Americans were this friendly. Some people laughed and said, I kept being asked where I was from. Some even admitted, I was mentally prepared to face indifference, but what I received was completely the opposite. What changed their prejudices was not a speech about America, not a tourism promotion campaign, but simply a stranger taking an extra 2 minutes to give directions, an employee taking a few extra words to ask how they are, or a group of fans inviting them to eat before the match. Those are very small moments, but it is those small moments that linger in memory for a long time. And right after this, we will step into the field that the English have always believed no one can teach them anything about football. And then, when the gates of the World Cup Stadium in the US opened, even the most discerning fans had to admit that. They did not expect what they were about to see. The British might concede to the Americans on parking lots, on supermarkets as vast as mazes, or even on air conditioning so cold that an extra jacket is needed in the summer. But there is one area where they always believe that no one can teach them anything. That is football. After all, this is the birthplace of the beautiful game. The old football fields, the songs in the stands, the weekend afternoons with the local club have become a part of England's identity. Therefore, before the World Cup took place, many English fans came to the US with a very confident mindset. They thought they were coming to watch football, not to learn how to build a football field. Then the stadium doors opened. Look at the expressions and the exclamations of these European fans. What surprises them is not the size of the stadium. The English are no strangers to famous stadiums. What left them speechless for a few seconds was how the entire structure operated like a miniature city. From the moment they stepped out of the car, everything seemed to be pre-planned. Wide walkways, clear signposts, dozens of food stalls, family areas, giant screens, sound systems, and restrooms located in multiple spots instead of having to walk halfway across the field to find them. Some people even humorously said, "I came to watch football, but it feels like I just stepped into a modern airport." That's a very different aspect of how Americans build a stadium. They don't just think about the 90 minutes on the field. They think about the entire day of the audience. You can arrive very early, eat, meet friends, buy souvenirs, participate in activities outside the stadium, and after the match, there is still enough space for tens of thousands of people to leave without creating a sense of chaos. The interesting thing is that the shock didn't stop at the World Cup. Many British tourists then continued to visit American high school stadiums. And this is when they really get confused. The large grandstands, lighting system, marching band, cheerleaders, spacious parking lot, and lively atmosphere made many people repeatedly ask, is this really just a high school? It turns out that the images they thought Hollywood had exaggerated for many years actually exist in real life, more than they imagined. Behind that is a very different perspective on sports. In many communities in the U.S., the school football team does not just belong to the students, it belongs to the whole town. The weekend match is not just an extracurricular activity. It is an occasion for neighbors to meet, families to gather, bands to perform, and the community to bond. Therefore, the stadium was also invested in as a communal space, not just a place to set up 2 goalposts and a few rows of seats. However, the most noteworthy event happened when they returned to England. They returned to the familiar football field. Still the same old stairs. Still the slightly narrow hallway. Still the line of people waiting in front of the food counter. Still those small seats that have been associated with countless generations of fans. And suddenly, they looked at everything with a different perspective. But this is also the time we need to look at the story fairly. American stadiums may win in terms of scale, technology, and convenience. But English football grounds still have things that are very hard to recreate with money. That is history. Perhaps that's why, after the World Cup, many English fans had the same thought. The US builds magnificent stadiums for an event, and England still possesses wonderful football stadiums for memories. The issue is, memories should not become the reason for all changes to come to a halt. And when leaving the stadium, many tourists continue to discover something else. Not just the stadium, but the entire country of America seems to be designed so that their journey is never interrupted. That will lead us to the next part of the story, where a gas station, a rest stop, and a road trip made many Europeans change their perspective on America. Europeans often joke that America is addicted to cars. Wherever you want to go, you have to drive. The distance between the cities is so great that just looking at the map makes you feel tired. But then the World Cup happened. They started driving from one city to another to watch the matches and discovered something very interesting. When a country forces you to travel a lot, it also has to learn how to serve you throughout the journey. One of the most delightful surprises came from the rest stops. There was a British tourist who said he only intended to stop by Buc-ee's to refuel. Then, an hour later, he still hadn't stepped outside. From grilled food, pastries, souvenirs, clothes, drinks to clean rows of restrooms, everything made him feel like he had just stepped into a shopping mall rather than a gas station. He even joked, "If the world ends tomorrow, I guess I just need to stay here." It sounds funny, but that reaction reveals something very interesting. Such stops don't just sell fuel, they sell a sense of reassurance. You know that if you travel hundreds of kilometers, there will still be places to rest, to eat, to take small children to the restroom, to buy a cup of coffee, or simply to stretch your legs for a few minutes before continuing on your way. That also explains why many stores, restaurants, or services in the US tend to open quite late, especially on major highways or around busy areas. After a World Cup match ends in the evening, finding a place that still serves food is usually not too difficult. Many tourists, when returning to England, the familiar rhythm of life immediately resumed. A few pubs were preparing to close. The pub's kitchen has stopped serving. Some towns become quite quiet early on, not because one side is more diligent than the other. Simply put, Each place is built to serve a different way of life. That's also why we shouldn't just look at the size and draw conclusions. America is vast, not just because Americans like to build big. The distances between cities are greater, urban planning relies more on cars, and long road trips occur more frequently. When you have to drive for hours, convenient rest stops or flexible service operations almost become part of the transportation infrastructure. Of course, meanwhile, England is smaller. So many areas still retain the advantage of being able to walk to a nearby cafe, train station, or pub. Therefore, what many Europeans remember most after the World Cup is not a big store or a famous gas station. It is the feeling of always having a place to stop, a clean restroom to use, and a location still open when the journey is not yet over. After all, perhaps we all realize one thing. No one really needs a supermarket as big as an airport to be happy. No one needs a cup of water so large that it never runs out. And a stadium with a giant screen doesn't automatically create a better match. So why do so many Europeans return to England after the World Cup with a feeling that something is no longer the same? Perhaps the answer lies in something very simple. America isn't always better, but America is very good at turning the things they value into something you can feel through your own experience. Not every choice is perfect, but you always know what that society prioritizes. Meanwhile, what makes many travelers think when they return to England is not because England lacks history or identity. On the contrary, it is history that sometimes makes people easily accept things that have existed for too long. There is a very fine line between valuing tradition and using tradition to justify unnecessary inconveniences. And perhaps that is exactly what the World Cup trip inadvertently achieved. It doesn't make the English want to become Americans. It doesn't make them love America more than their homeland. What it does is simply make a comparison. But the story doesn't end with America being the winner either, because England still has things that many travelers start to miss after their trip. On the other hand, America also has to trade off for that convenience. Longer distances, a life more dependent on cars, and many experiences come with higher costs. Each model has its own advantages and limitations. Perhaps that's why the title of this video is not entirely accurate in the way many people think. What England really loses is not size. But in a few very small moments, America makes people feel that life is designed to be less inconvenient. And what makes the return trip uncomfortable is not because the homeland has suddenly become worse, but because after experiencing a different way of functioning, the familiar explanations that used to be convincing suddenly no longer hold any power. Travel not only shows us how vast the world is, sometimes it even shows us that the standards we use to evaluate life have changed without us even realizing it. In your opinion, after the World Cup, what is the most unforgettable thing in America for a European? Is it the convenience, the service, the modern stadiums, or just a cup full of ice water? Please share your perspective in the comments section. After all, perhaps the most memorable thing about the World Cup is not just the goals or the dazzling stadiums. It is the fact that a trip can make us look at the place we live from a completely different perspective. The United States and the United Kingdom both have their strengths, limitations, and unique values. The interesting thing is not which country is better, but that each trip helps us raise new questions about convenience, culture, and things that seem very ordinary in daily life. What about you? If you have ever lived, studied, or traveled in the US or the UK, what surprised you the most? Is there any experience that completely changed the way you view a country? Please share your story in the comments. I would love to read and discuss it with everyone. If you enjoy analysis and reaction videos like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next topics on economics, society, culture, and interesting perspectives around the United States. And finally, please note that this video is made for the purpose of analyzing, commenting on, and comparing cultural experiences based on common feedback from travelers and public information sources. The comments in the video do not represent every individual, every locality, or the entirety of life in the United States or the United Kingdom.